History remembers her as Bloody Mary, the queen who drowned England in fire. But the flames she lit outside were nothing compared to the ones consuming her inside. It is a story about a queen whose body began to decay while she was still alive. We all know her as Bloody Mary, a merciless monster who sat on the throne. But what if I tell you that her infamous fires were only a reflection of the personal hell that was happening inside her own bedroom and even within her womb? We will look behind the closed doors of her royal chambers, where a real drama was unfolding. A drama in which there were ghostly children, an empty cradle, and desperate attempts to hide from the whole world her most humiliating and shameful physical illness. What was the disease that made her husband, the King of Spain, reluctantly turn away and eventually run from her forever? In this video, we will go through the entire path of her intimate suffering. We will find out how a woman who desperately longed for love turned into a monster, and how her greatest personal tragedy, her infertility, paradoxically brought England its golden age. This is a story that will make your heart bleed, and it is much deeper than just the tale of an evil queen. So, before we plunge into this darkness, if you like such detailed investigations of the dark pages of history, do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss new episodes. And if this video seems worthy to you, you can always support me by liking it. And now, let's begin. Imagine for a moment a little princess, the pride and the apple of the eye of the mighty King Henry VIII, his pearl. Her father's soul adored her beyond measure. She had the best teachers, silk dresses, and a bright future as a queen. The whole world lay at her feet. And then a shadow appeared in the palace halls, and Bullen, and everything changed. The world of the little princess did not just shake. It collapsed in an instant. The loud divorce of her parents shook the whole of Europe, and for Mary it became a personal apocalypse. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was betrayed. Mary herself was declared a bastard, an illegitimate child. This word was like a stigma burned into her young soul. The father who had once carried her in his arms turned into a merciless jailer. He demanded the impossible from her, to publicly deny her mother and admit herself to be the fruit of sin. In that loneliness and fear, the Mary was born whom history would later know. Her entire later life became a desperate attempt to mend the hole her father had burned in her heart. She sought his love and approval in every man. She wanted marriage not for power, but for status, to become legitimate again, to have someone strong look at her and say, "You are mine, you are real." That childhood trauma gave birth to a monstrous thirst in her, a desire for love mixed with submission, and above all, a longing to have a child. The heir was not only a dynastic question for her. He was her chance to prove to the world and to the ghost of her father that she was not empty, that she was a woman capable of giving birth to a healthy son. And so he came, Philip of Spain. For Mary, it was a chance for healing. She, a woman in her 30s with a face touched by sadness, saw in him a man who could make her whole, a husband who would wash away the mark of a bastard with his love. The court was buzzing. Everyone was talking about his youth and his foreign appearance. Was she capable of tenderness? Their first meeting was awkward and public, but the real drama unfolded later, behind the closed doors of the royal bedroom. He was young, tired of travel, and she was tense. It was her first night with a man, the first and the last. For Mary, this night was not about simple closeness. It was a sacred act, a ritual that was supposed to erase years of humiliation. She gave her wounded soul in the hope that it would finally be accepted and warmed. During the following week, she desperately clung to every sign of attention. A light touch of his hand, a fleeting smile. All this was magnified in her imagination to the size of a great dream. She wrote in her letters what a wonderful husband he was. Was it true? Or was she just trying to convince herself, creating an illusion of happiness because reality was too unbearable? This marriage with a foreigner became her personal battlefield, where she fought for the right to be loved, even if she had to invent that love herself. She did not yet know that this battle had been lost from the very beginning. It all started, as it should, quietly, almost miraculously. Her monthly cycles stopped. Her body, which had been silent for many years, began to change, to round, to whisper to her the long-awaited lie. And she believed. She believed with all the faith that only the desperate can feel. It was a sign from above, an answer to thousands of prayers. God finally smiled upon her. Soon the quiet joy spread, filling the whole court. The queen was pregnant. For everyone else it was politics, but for Mary, it was her personal triumph. She carried beneath her heart the proof of her completeness. She felt her stomach enlarging and sensed sudden fits of bitterness. Were these real signs or just a desperate trick of the mind? She was in a state of ecstatic joy. A splendid cradle was already prepared, and baby clothes were being sewn. Mary already imagined herself as a mother. This image erased every past humiliation. In her heart, this child was her revenge for everything she had endured. The appointed moment arrived. The queen was alone, preparing for childbirth and waiting. Days turned into weeks. The silence in the queen's chambers became unbearable. The midwives whispered among themselves, and the doctors spread their hands helplessly. Something was wrong. Joyful expectation was replaced first by anxiety, and then by heavy, sticky horror. Where was the child? Why didn't the contractions begin? And then, nothing. Simply nothing. The belly that had seemed so convincing to everyone began to shrink, collapsing like a burst bubble of illusion. The ghostly movements in her womb stopped. Her body returned to its former infertile state. Imagine this shame, not only personal sorrow but public disgrace. The cradle stood in the corner like mockery. Philip, who had never been truly affectionate toward her, became even colder and soon found a reason to leave England. She was left alone with her empty womb. God not only turned away from her but cruelly laughed at her. And in this emptiness, in this scorched desert of her soul, something new began to form. If God did not give her a child of love, perhaps he demanded children of fire. He left quietly and simply. For Philip, leaving England was a political necessity. For Mary, his departure became the beginning of a long icy winter in the middle of summer. The door closed behind him, and the royal bedroom turned into a mausoleum of broken hopes. Their paper romance began, the most painful kind of relationship. She wrote him long, desperate letters filled with tenderness and longing. It was a conversation with a ghost. She put meaning into his dry formal replies that was never really there. Her loneliness became almost physical. The silence in her rooms seemed to have weight. The huge bed with a canopy made for two became a silent reproach. Every night she lay in that cold emptiness. This intimate physical loneliness tormented her more than any political intrigue. Her feminine weakness cast a shadow over her royal dignity. Once her earthly husband abandoned her, she clung even tighter to her heavenly one. Her religiosity took the form of a dull bargain. She prayed for hours, humbling herself with fasting. It was a desperate magic clothed in the form of Catholic rituals. And one day, when hope was almost gone, the news came that he might return. Not out of love, of course, but because of politics. But for Mary, the reason no longer mattered. The news of his possible return was like a sip of water to someone dying of thirst. A feverish light appeared again in her lifeless eyes. She received a new dose of hope, the most dangerous of all. That hope pushed her body and mind toward another, final, and most terrible deception. While Mary fought her paper war with loneliness and prayed to heaven for her husband's return, inside her, in her most feminine essence, another, much more dreadful enemy was ripening. He had always been there. It was her illness, a treacherous tumor that had once deceived her, pretending to be pregnancy, and now began to show its true face. It was her most horrible, most humiliating secret. It was no longer about the ghostly dream of motherhood. It was about physical decay. Her stomach often swelled, bringing constant pain. But something worse was waiting ahead. It was something that made her shiver with disgust toward her own body. Historians suggest that a tumor of the uterus or the ovary could have caused gangrenous processes. There was a feeling of internal rotting, accompanied by symptoms that frightened her. Perhaps there was a bad, sweet odor, or some kind of unclean discharge. Her body, which could not fulfill its duty and give life, now became a source of decay. Her physical distance could even be considered a kind of salvation. It was better to long for a ghost than to face a living man in such a humiliating condition. Her bedroom turned into a kind of quarantine chamber, where the queen hid her bodily shame from the world. For such a deeply religious woman, it could not be only a disease. She saw in it the hand of God, punishment for her sins. If her body was rotting, this physical agony and sense of impurity only fed her religious obsession. Purifying England with fire, burning heretics at the stakes. Did she try to symbolically burn out the rot that was inside her? The bonfires on Smithfield Square became a terrible reflection of the inner hell where she lived every single day. Every morning she rose, fighting against pain and disgust. The mask she wore hid from the world a woman who was slowly decaying alive. The human soul cannot endure emptiness, and the soul of Mary was filled with it. An empty cradle, an empty marital bed, a body devastated by illness. All that huge, unspent energy of passion, tenderness, and maternal love had to find release. And she found it in the purifying flame of the fires. If she could not create life, she would furiously defend eternal life. Her relationship with God turned into a passionate love affair. The earthly husband Philip was cold, but the heavenly bridegroom was near, always beside her. The heretics were not just enemies. They were rivals trying to take her people away from the true husband. Their very existence was a personal insult. Was there a terrible ecstasy when she signed another death sentence? Did she feel a strange kind of liberation? The fire of the stake was the only flame she could control. The heat that burned the flesh of the heretics became a dreadful substitution for the warmth she had never known in her husband's arms. The screams of the condemned, the monstrous roar of those voices, sounds she herself would never make, neither in passion nor in childbirth. It was her horrific form of creation. She believed that by sending the bodies of heretics into the fire, she was saving their immortal souls. What a monstrous version of love, possessive, unyielding, and ready to destroy. In this cruelty was reflected her whole personal tragedy, her desperate need for love and control. But the bonfires brought her no relief. The more people burned, the stronger the resistance became. The smell of burning flesh filled the air of London, and her own reputation. She, who had so desperately longed for love, became the most hated woman in the kingdom. Her great fiery devotion to God turned against her, turning her into a monster in the eyes of her subjects. Not becoming the queen of her king and the mother of an heir, she became the bride of fire. And that was a union with a prisoner in hell. Philip's return, though short, became the last straw for Mary. His presence revived the wildest of her hopes. Her mind, tormented by pain, loneliness, and faith, began to rewrite reality. She desperately desired a miracle and created it herself. This time everything was different. She renamed the symptoms of her disease as signs of new life. Constant swelling of the belly, growing pain, absence of menstruation, imagined movements of a child. All these became proof of pregnancy. It was an act of ultimate self-deception, her last attempt to believe that her suffering had a higher meaning. The bell was silent. This silence was not a sign of joy but a mixture of pity and bad foreboding. The court saw before them a pale, bloated woman with an unnaturally swollen belly. The physicians gave vague and cautious answers. Everyone, except Mary herself, understood that this was suffering, not birth. Her faith in the miracle was lonely, almost insane. She did everything according to custom, wrote her will, issued official bulletins. She tried with the strength of her will to make her fantasy become reality. For her, it was the last chance to justify everything. The fires, her cruelty, her failed life. The outcome was quiet and terrifying. Philip, without waiting for any miracle, left, this time forever. It was not the departure of a faithful ally but the escape from a sick, dying wife. His leaving became the last nail hammered into the lid of her coffin. After that, even she could no longer maintain her illusion. It did not just burst. It decayed together with her body, dissolving in the realization that ahead lay only pain and emptiness. The empty cradle, prepared a second time, became the final, cruelest symbol of her completely barren life. After the collapse of this second false pregnancy, the mask finally fell. Before the court now stood not a queen awaiting an heir but an exhausted, dying woman. Her own body, the most intimate vessel of her power, had become her greatest betrayer, undermining her authority day by day. Chronic stomach pain became her constant shadow. It dictated whether the queen could attend the council of advisors or even rise from her bed. The same woman who had ruled the fates of thousands could not command her own body to obey. Every sign of weakness, every trace of pain on her face, became a public display of helplessness. Her dependence on her ladies-in-waiting turned into daily humiliation. And while she was a prisoner of her disease, her kingdom began to crumble. The greatest blow was the loss of Calais, the last fragment of English land on the continent. This military disaster became the perfect symbol of her reign. While her body was weak and powerless, her kingdom was also losing its strength. They say she admitted that after her death, the word Calais would be found engraved on her heart. Perhaps, but too many names and unfulfilled hopes had already been pressed into that heart: Henry, Catherine, Philip, and the name of the unborn child. England became an orphan even before the Queen's death. Power was slipping away from her weakened hands. Courtiers began to act behind her back. They turned their gaze toward the rising sun, toward her sister Elizabeth. Mary became a ghost wandering in her own palace. She was alive, but she had already been buried in spirit. It was the final loneliness. In this atmosphere of complete defeat, only one thing remained: to recognize Elizabeth as her successor. It was a signature placed under the act of total surrender. She accepted that her body had lost the fight with death, her faith had lost the fight for England's soul, and her tragic life was merely the prologue to her rival's rule. And in the gallery of Mary's personal tragedies, one portrait grew brighter with each year: the portrait of her sister Elizabeth. It was not merely a political rival. No, it was something far more intimate. Elizabeth was a living, distorted mirror of her, reflecting every one of Mary's failures. She was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman who had destroyed Mary's world. She was young when Mary felt old. She was healthy while Mary decayed from within. She was sharp-minded, charming, and possessed that lightness which Mary had lost forever in childhood. Their bond was a tightly tied knot. It was not just hatred, envy, fear, reluctant respect, and maybe the worst of all, recognition. Only they both truly knew what it meant to be the daughters of Henry VIII, to be princesses and then bastards, to live forever under an invisible sword. This shared wound created a strange and silent connection between them. Mary probably saw in Elizabeth not only the child of her rival but also herself, the version of who she could have become. When Mary kept Elizabeth under arrest, it was more than a political decision. It was an intimate act of power. The frail, sick, barren queen held in her hands the youth, beauty, and future of England. Did she do it out of sisterly feeling or cold reasoning? Imagine their last meeting, when the ailing Mary was forced to name Elizabeth as her successor. One was a dying flame, the other a coiled spring ready to rise and take the world. Their entire lives were hanging in that single moment between them. At that instant, Mary lost her final, most personal battle. She, who had spent her life fighting against the legacy of Anne Boleyn, now passed the crown with her own hands to that woman's daughter. After this act, the atmosphere at court changed instantly. The focus of power shifted toward the circle of the next heir. It was the last betrayal that Mary had to watch while still alive. Her people, her court, and her country already looked to the future, one that had no place for her. When she died, they say a storm raged across England, and afterward came an unusual, deep silence. In her lonely chamber, which had always been her companion, Queen Mary finally found rest. Her body, her traitor, her prison, her executioner, stopped its struggle. The pain left her, and in that stillness, her legacy began to take shape. At first, it was written by the winners. Protestant writers needed a dark shadow to make their light seem brighter, and they created the image of Bloody Mary. Her private tragedies were turned inside out and used as political weapons. Infertile, hysterical, fanatical. Such was the mask they painted on her. They forgot that at the root of her cruelty lay unbearable human pain. She was condemned for being barren, though her infertility became her greatest, though unintentional, gift to England. Her true will was not written in ink on parchment but in her own body and blood. It was the will of a broken woman. Her decaying, sick body gave birth to a decaying, suspicious politics. Her blood, or rather the absence of an heir, decided the fate of England for centuries ahead. All her life was a desperate effort to build a Catholic future for her kingdom. The irony of fate was that her barren womb, her personal female tragedy, became the cradle for England's golden age under Elizabeth and the Protestant revival. Not giving birth to a child, she gave birth to a new era. Today, historians try to look past the caricature and see the living person. A woman trapped between faith and duty, a daughter broken by her father's betrayal, a wife who sought love in a cold political marriage, a mother deceived twice by her own body, a sufferer whose hidden illness poisoned her every day and decision. Her entire life, her bloody reign, if you look at its core, was one great, failed love story. Desperate, distorted, sometimes monstrous, but still love. Love for the father who abandoned her, for the husband who used and left her, for God, whose affection became a cruel bargain. And above all, love for the child who never came into the world, but whose ghost ruled England with her until her last lonely breath.